Brian Kelly responds to comments made by Greg Brooks Sr. You'll hear from the coach. It's Locked on LSU. Let's go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen every day. We're free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. And as always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Brian Kelly met with reporters on Wednesday. He discussed additions to LSU staff, the transfer portal class, gave an update on quarterback Colin Hurley after that automobile accident a few weeks back. But what is catching the most headlines are the comments Brian Kelly made in response to what Greg Brooks Sr. Primarily had to say in an interview on Good Morning America. For those who are unaware, I'll very quickly catch you up. So Greg Brooks was a football player from New Orleans who started his college career at Arkansas when Brian Kelly was hired at LSU. He recruited Brooks out of the portal back to Louisiana. And Brooks played the 2022 season, was very good, came back for a fifth season in 2023. And we later learned that it was during the fall camp of that season that Greg Brooks started having headaches and nausea, vomiting, played the start of the season, then was not with the team for the remainder of the year. For what we later learned was the fact that Greg Brooks was diagnosed with a brain tumor. He was operated on, there were complications, and now a year and a half later, for the first time, we have seen and heard from Greg Brooks. And the interview that was released on Monday on Good Morning America was jarring. I'm not sure there was any new information. Good Morning America cited the lawsuit that has been filed, and the Brooks family has filed a lawsuit against many of the parties, from LSU and the football program to the hospital and doctors that took care of him, alleging negligence and improprieties and fault for the condition that Greg Brooks is in. A young man who, 18 months ago, was a college football player with NFL aspirations. Now, is having to relearn to speak, to eat, to walk, everything. And it is very jarring to see. And that is probably, for most that saw it, the biggest takeaway was physically hearing and seeing Greg Brooks for the first time in a year and a half in that condition. And I understand that's going to spark a lot of intense feeling and emotion for that young man. And what maybe ratcheted it all up further are comments that Greg Brooks Sr. made on Good Morning America. And I'm going to play these comments for you. So the first voice you're going to hear is Michael Strahan, the Pro Football Hall of Famer, who was interviewing Greg and Greg Sr. And then you're going to hear Greg Sr.'s response to Michael Strahan's inquiry.
From the LSU coaching staff since October of 2023.
Specifically, Brian Kelly. My son almost lost his life, coach. Where were you? Forget about football. Pick up the phone and say you love the kid, man.
You say you haven't heard from anybody.
So that was Greg Brooks Sr. Alleging that his family has not heard from anybody within the LSU program since October of 2023. That is 16 months. Nobody for 16 months. And then says specifically Brian Kelly. Now, it is not for me to opine here. I will say it feels like that's something that, if it does go to court, can be pretty easily verified or disproven. There are call records and call logs and text records and visitor logs at hospitals. We can find very clearly if anybody has contacted the Brooks family from LSU in the last 16 months. But that's not the point. But Brian Kelly did what you would anticipate someone who was who feels like they were wrongly accused would do. And Brian Kelly vehemently defended himself on Wednesday.
I would be remiss if I did not address Greg Brooks Jr. and the situation that unfolded in an interview that was done on Good Morning America. There's many things I can't say because it is pending litigation, obviously. But here's what I can tell you. It is factually incorrect to state that I was not there by Greg's side through this ordeal. I was there on multiple occasions. We had somebody from my staff that was there virtually every single day. We love Greg. We love him for the person that he is, for the competitor that he is, and the battler that he is, and can only wish him continued progress as he goes through an incredibly difficult time.
So Kelly says point blank, he was there on multiple occasions. Someone from his staff was there almost every day. Now, where is there? Of course, there was a time where Greg Brooks left Baton Rouge and Our Lady of the Lake and went to St. Jude in Memphis. Again, all of that, eventually we assume will play itself out in court, or hopefully it doesn't get to court. But in any event, the issue at hand here is Brian Kelly responding. And he went further and specifically addressed Greg Brooks Sr.'s comments even more and used some phrasing that is hard to ignore.
Any player that is part of this program, I am going to be involved in making sure that they receive the best care, the best support, and I'm part of that. You can question me as a football coach. You can question me in terms of the things that we do on the field. But off the field, as a parent, as a husband, as somebody that is actively involved in every community that I've been involved with, this is where the line is drawn with me. And that comment struck a nerve with me. It hit my heart because that's not why I'm in this business. I've been in it for our players, will always be in it for our players, and it rattled me that somebody could possibly be so factually incorrect in stating that I was not part of Greg Brooks Jr.'s care and support.
Hard to ignore how forcefully Brian Kelly was with his defense of himself. Again, I've been asked a lot my opinion on this matter. And one thing is always going to be clear, and anyone who has ever listened to, watched any of the content I put out, you know something definitively about me, which is I don't miss words. I don't sit on the fence. I give you an opinion. This is a situation where I think I have one opinion. One. And my one singular opinion is that LSU needs to provide every resource possible for Greg Brooks and his family for as long as it takes for him to live, Greg Brooks, to live the highest quality of life he can possibly live for the remainder of his life, whatever that looks like. And that is a grave reality. And I'm coming from the perspective of someone who, and some of you may know this about me, but I have a son who's 10 years old. And when he was born, he had serious medical complications and we had to relocate to get specialized care. We were in the hospital for 9 months. He's had 8 surgeries. I have been through a lot. And every situation is different. I'm not saying it's the same as the Brooks family in any way. But I do know the feeling of handing your child over to a doctor to operate, to try to save their life. I've had to do that before. I know that feeling. And I am not going to argue in any way about the legalities. The accusations of negligence that have been made in the lawsuit, because I do not know. I don't know. I have had conversations with people associated with LSU that tell a very different tale. And the truth is there's 2 sides to every story, and I don't know which is true. I don't. And maybe we'll find out in court. Hopefully it doesn't have to go to court. So I don't have any opinion on any of that. because those are very real, serious conversations, and those are things that'll play out in court and all that sort of stuff. But what I think is inarguable, because this isn't about negligence or liability or anything like that. This is just about being human. The reality, and I think we would all of us would agree, Greg Brooks needs help. LSU has the means and resources to provide that help. So provide that help to every single possible length and degree that you possibly can to help Greg Brooks recover to live whatever is and whatever will be the highest quality of his life for however long that is, because that is the right thing to do, regardless of what a court says. But Brian Kelly, he sounded convincing. So did Greg Brooks Sr. Maybe one day in court, you end up looking at things like medical visitor logs and call records and text messages, and it'll tell that story. It will tell that story. But I'm less interested in that. I'm way more interested in Greg Brooks getting whatever help he needs for as long as he needs it. And LSU needs to do the right thing and provide that. And here's hoping they will. It's Locked on LSU, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Looking for tickets to the next big event, whether it's a concert, a comedy show, or a sporting event? Finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache, but with Game Time Picks, it's never been easier. So here's how it works. With Game Time Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals, so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticketing listings. Listen, I've used Game Time's Picks, and it is a great resource. The curated deals makes it easy to find great tickets at a great price. The super deal will show you a prime seat at a great value. The seat view feature, in my opinion, is a total game changer. Before you hit buy, you can see exactly what your seat will look like in the venue. It is so reassuring. And the best part, you're covered with Game Time's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. So, if you're ready to make your next event even better, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. While Brian Kelly began his media availability talking about the Greg Brooks situation, they did discuss an awful lot of football, which is why I'm sure many of you are here to begin with. Remember, Wednesday was National Signing Day, the old traditional signing day, which isn't very impactful anymore because almost every recruit ends up signing in the December signing period. Many people probably woke up on Wednesday and didn't even realize that it was signing day, but it was. And so Brian Kelly met with reporters afterwards and sort of discussed the team and everything that's happened to get the roster to this point. And one thing that Brian Kelly said that was abundantly clear was what their approach was, what their goal was, what their aim was, what their end was in this portal cycle and doing what LSU did.
Big picture plan is exactly what you said. It was to surround Garrett on offense, to give Blake the pieces that he needs on defense to have a championship roster. And I believe we did that on paper. Now we need to go to work on that. And that work is in the details over the next few months.
So building a championship roster. And I completely agree with him that they have done that. And I've said as much here. What LSU has done with this portal class, in addition to a top 10 signing class, getting Garrett Nussmeier to return, getting Harold Perkins to return, getting Jacoby and Guillory off of injury, what they have done is built a championship roster. What they have done is effectively what Ohio State and Ole Miss did in 2024. Now, Ohio State won the national championship, but I will remind you, Ohio State was a 2-loss football team. They lost at Oregon, and they had an embarrassing loss to Michigan. They were the most talented team in college football that started playing their best in the end, and sometimes that's what you need to win a playoff. Ole Miss was as talented a football team as any in the country. You go look at ESPN's FPI, and they consistently rank Ole Miss in the top 5. But they laid an egg at home against a terrible Kentucky team. They lost on the road in Baton Rouge, a game where they did not trail until the final score, where they got shut out in the second half, where they had a turnover inside LSU's red zone and came away with no points as a result of it. They gave up a 4th down touchdown pass from Garrett Nussmeier to Aaron Anderson. I mean, all those scenarios that unfolded, they blew it. The Florida game was another one where they had 3 possessions in the red zone, 3 times went forward on 4th down, 3 times got stuffed. They blew it. So all that to say, you can have a championship roster, doesn't mean you're going to make the playoff or be a championship team. There's a lot that goes into that, and certainly a big part of that is going to be the draw. But one thing is undeniable, is that if you roll back the clock 8 months, or you go to the end of last year, or around the springtime, you roll back the clock to where LSU was 8 months ago, and whenever they were desperate in the transfer portal and that spring portal window for defensive tackles, where they added Blake Oxendorf, the punter, and where they were then and where they are now, it is a completely different feel. And Brian Kelly acknowledges much.
I don't want our roster to be built through the portal. I would like it to be topped off. This year was a little bit heavier. We felt that we needed more depth and more experience across roster to be a championship roster. I believe that the portal has served us from that perspective in terms of additions and others that have left, that we strengthened our program. I think we've made incredible strides relative to NIL and the importance of how monies are raised and making sure that our fan base is educated about that. And I think I've been at the front of that with the $1 million match. And so I think all of those were in a much better place than we were, say, 8 months ago. Our roster, our staff, our focus on NIL, our ability to raise money for NIL have put us in a position where I know our program is now poised to be a championship program.
Remember the scenario where you were desperate to add a defensive tackle in the spring portal window. Dominic Williams from TCU, who ended up at Oklahoma, was the prized target. He wanted $1.2 million, and LSU couldn't and wouldn't pay it. So they didn't. And so you only got JVR Suggs. Dramatically different now because of their approach to the portal, how they manage their roster, their ability to spend because of their fundraising efforts, in large part, yes, to Brian Kelly there with the $1 million match. It is a dramatically different feeling today. Now, the other thing Brian Kelly said there was they still want to build through the high school ranks and top off, he said. I always say supplement, but top off through the transfer portal. And that's a great goal. And yes, that would be a fantastic thing to be able to do. But one of the things Kelly said in needing to go into the portal was their depth had been hurt. Well, the reason your depth is hurt is because a quarter of all college football players enter the portal every year. So think of it this way. You sign a signing class 2 seasons after, half of that class is gone. There goes your depth. So now you have old players who have stayed and the new players you brought in. It may not be a sustainable model to think you're going to continue to recruit 30 high schoolers and 9 portal players and maintain a championship roster. It may be more that you need 16 impact portal guys each year to be able to compete for a championship. It may be. Again, we're still learning. This is an ever-evolving landscape with not only NIL, but we're about to start with revenue share, a new 12-team playoff. Like, what it takes to win in this era is still evolving. But one thing's clear, what LSU was doing wasn't working. They needed to make a change, and the change was spend a lot of money on top-tier talent in the portal. They did that. Now, will it translate to wins? That's the other thing we'll have to watch. You heard Brian Kelly mention specifically the $1 million match. He did give an update there. Remember, that was Brian Kelly, the Kelly family, donating $1 million to – you can't specifically give it to NIL, but it'll find its way there. And he gave an update on how it all went.
Very appreciative of our fans and the generosity. The $1 million match that I put out there relative to NIL. It looks like we've met our goals, and I couldn't be more excited about that and the direction that allows us to continue to move relative to NIL. So we had an anonymous gift that matched it in its totality. Plus, I think there'll be a release here in the next 48 hours that we also were able to match the initial NIL.
So Brian Kelly's $1 million, the anonymous $1 million that came in to match it, and then fan fundraising, another $1 million. It's $3 million. $3 million off the back of that program that Brian Kelly initiated. That, in part with the surplus revenue that you didn't spend on Bryce Underwood and Jakeem Stewart and Cade Phillips that you had allocated, freed up so much money that LSU was flush with cash. They were able to go do this in the portal and build this roster. Now, where Brian Kelly started, is it enough? Like on paper, it is. Now you got to go do the work on the field to get yourself in position to win next December and January. Now, another big shakeup that LSU's had is on the coaching staff. Want to update that from Brian Kelly next. Locked on LSU, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. The big game is almost here, and there is no better way to make it even more exciting than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, PrizePicks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. So here's how it works. You just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections. And if you're right, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. PrizePicks even has a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw 1 yard to win. Pair that with one more correct pick, and you're cashing out. This week, look at the board, select more, whatever it may be. Maybe it's Travis Kelce on receiving yards or more for a quarterback's passing yardage. What I love the most, fast and safe withdrawals. So when I win, my cash is in my account in as little as 15 minutes. So check out the promo tab to tail any of the sweet, super sweet Millie winners, big game lineups. If you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of $1 million in promo funds. So download the app and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you place your first $5 lineup. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. So we'll wrap up with some more turnover as Brian Kelly, more shakeup on the staff, something we've talked a good bit about here. So if you're an everydayer, thank you for that. We've talked about some of these additions from Lance Guidry, of course, with Ahmad Anon at coaching special teams. We talked about Tim Rattay joining as an offensive analyst, Noah Joseph joining as a defensive analyst. But Brian Kelly actually said he went through the hirings and said they're actually not done.
Tim Rattay, who many know probably from his time at Louisiana Tech, will work on the offensive side of the ball. We've hired another offensive assistant from Oregon, Antonio Parks. He'll work with the wide receivers. And we have a couple of others that are pending HR that I can't talk about today.
So there's even more still coming, which, one of the things that has been my contention, and Brian Kelly was asked this, you'll hear this in a second, was that part of what you're seeing on the staff is we have seen a tightening of the belt on the off-field support staff. J.R. Belton being promoted to director of operations after Jazz Smith was let go. Beth Rex, who left the program in October, was not replaced. A lot of her duties shifted over to Austin Thomas. We saw Jacoby Stevens, Nick Brissett let go. They were not replaced. And part of my contention is that is tightening the belt in preparation for revenue share. LSU sharing $20.5 million of revenue next fiscal year with its student athletes. It's got to both raise more money and cut spending. So you identify ways to cut spending and you raise more money. That's how you fill that gap. I mean, it's economics. It's what you have to do. And Brian Kelly was asked if the streamlining of the staff was impacted because of revenue share.
No, and I think that's a natural question to ask, and that revenue sharing comes to us, assuming that the House NCAA decision, is finalized. But I know there are some programs around the country that have had to cut back, but that has not been the case here.
Saying it's not been the case, candidly, I don't believe him. Because I told you 3 years ago that I had very direct conversations with high-level athletic administrators, told me that LSU was preparing for the inevitability of revenue share. I don't think it's the only reason, but I think it would be naive to assume it's not. I also understand why publicly the head coach has to stand there and say, no, that's not part of the decisions that were made, because you want to put forth the image that you are healthy and flush with cash and not having to have cuts, because that can be perceived a certain way. There's no way to prove it one way or another. But I think it's also very natural to assume that budget cuts are part of this for a lot of places. I don't think LSU is exempt from that. One more, and this is another on-field. When we talked about a lot of the analysts coming in, like we told you, Lance Guidry, I was told, was going to work with the star position. That means Harold Perkins. Ahmad Anan, who's going to work, be your special teams analyst. Tim Rattay, of course, is going to work with Joe Sloan and the quarterbacks. Well, Noah Joseph is another one who we looked at, a guy that came in who has spent 2 decades as a guy working with the defense, primarily with safeties. He most recently, though, had spent 2 years at Purdue as the general manager, just moved to East Carolina as their general manager. But 6 weeks after taking that job, he joins LSU staff as a defensive analyst. And it just stands to reason when you look at his history that he would coach safeties, and Brian Kelly effectively confirmed that on Wednesday.
Added defensive analyst Noah Joseph, who's an experienced coach, both on and off the field, primarily worked with Blake at Missouri. So there's, obviously they're very familiar. He'll work in the back end of our defense. So you're talking about the position group that was your worst position group a year ago. That was your safeties. You've upgraded the talent by adding to Marcus Cooley. You hope that some of your young guys getting a year older will be a year better. But Sage Ryan's out. Jordan Gilbert is back as well, hopefully healthy, and that's another good year. But Major Burns is gone as well. You got to get more out of your safety position, and very clearly Noah Joseph is being brought in to help there. Finally, before we get out of here, Brian Kelly did provide an update on Colin Hurley, the LSU quarterback who a couple of weeks ago was in a car wreck where he hit a tree. He said there is no timetable yet for his return, but here was the update. Well, as you know, because of his age, at 17, he's under 18. We've left a lot of that up to the family. I've been there to see him on multiple occasions. Progress is real. He is back in Jacksonville, and reports in talking to his dad yesterday were really positive. So we're, again, this is another scenario where, there's a recovery process here for him. But I think everybody's optimistic.
Optimistic, that's great. But keep in mind, the spring semester has begun, and spring football, and by the way, Colin Hurley's health and recovery is dramatically more important than football or school or any of that stuff. And we'll still wait and see what some of the details are of that crash that will still come out. But the spring semester is going on, and Colin Hurley, as you just heard Brian Kelly say, is home in Jacksonville. Well, spring football starts at the beginning of March, so you're about 5 weeks away there or so, 5 or 6 weeks away from spring football. So you are maybe less than maybe 4 or 5 weeks away from the start of spring football. Hard to imagine Colin Hurley participating if he's home in Jacksonville. So maybe even more of an opportunity for Michael Van Buren this spring. Just something to file away and keep an eye on. Okay, that'll do it for us here on today's episode of Locked On LSU. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. Now for your second listen, go check out my guy Chris Gordy. I actually saw Gordo on Media Row at SEC at Super Bowl Media Days on Wednesday. So go check out Locked On SEC, however you get podcasts. Of course, if you're listening to us on podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video. And let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We got you here every single day for Locked On LSU, your team every day.